Recording. Hello again, it's me Chaz back for another video. This is a new series I'm doing for the next 2 weeks. Yeah, I say 2 weeks. I'm going to discuss each of the groups for the 2026 World Cup. So that's Group A all the way up to Group L. So each day I'm going to discuss one of the groups individually. Talk about the nations, all 4 nations that are in each group, and how I feel they will do at this World Cup. Last year, December 4th, the draw was made to see what nations will be going up against each other at the 2026 World Cup in the USA, Mexico, and Canada. So the 42 teams that already qualified and the other nations that still have a chance to qualify through the playoffs, they all know what nations they will be competing with in the group stage. So all groups have a total of 4 teams in. Most groups have already been completed. There's still a few groups that haven't been completed. As I said, there's still a handful of 6 spots still up for grabs. We're going to start with the first group. Might as well start with Group A. 3 out of the 4 nations in Group A we are aware of. Those 3 nations are Mexico, who are the hosts for this World Cup, co-hosts. And this is the 3rd time they would be hosting a World Cup, becoming the first nation to ever do that. They are original 13 nation. They have competed at the very first World Cup in Uruguay back in 1930. And quite a regular nation at the World Cup, competing in 17 tournaments before or prior to this tournament. So again, they're a regular team at the World Cup, but they have never reached beyond the quarter-final stage. Both the 2 prior World Cups that they hosted back in 1970 and 1986 remains the best finishes that Mexico has ever had at a World Cup, again reaching the quarterfinals. They are joined by South Africa. South Africa is the very first nation from Africa and the only nation to ever host the World Cup. They hosted the World Cup back in 2010. South Africa made their debut at the 1998 World Cup back in France. South Africa have now returned to the World Cup in 2026. They actually haven't competed at the World Cup since the time they were the hosts, as mentioned, back in 2010. The opening match of the World Cup will be between Mexico and South Africa. That would be a repeat of the 2010 opening game between these 2 nations. Off the top of my head, I don't know if this is a first. This might be a first. I'm not sure. Hey, the 3rd nation in their group who joins both Mexico and South Africa is South Korea. Back in 2002, South Korea and Japan co-hosted the World Cup. Those 2 nations became the first nations from Asia, from the AFC, to ever host a World Cup, and also became the first nations to co-host a World Cup. South Korea made their debut at the World Cup back in 1954 in Switzerland. They would return back to the World Cup in 1986 and have qualified for every World Cup since 1986. Interesting enough, that World Cup also took place in Mexico. Back in 2002, South Korea became the very first nation and only nation from the AFC, from Asia, to ever reach the semi-final of a World Cup. They finished 4th in that World Cup. But since then, South Korea hasn't made it beyond the round of 16. So that's the 3 nations that will be in this group. Should mention one thing I forgot to say about South Africa. This would be South Africa's 4th World Cup. The 3 previous World Cups that they competed in, they haven't went beyond the group stage. Okay, let's talk quickly about how all three of these nations have been able to qualify for the 2026 World Cup. Mexico, as hosts, they automatically qualify for a World Cup. This has been a thing since 1938. Though during this time, they current Gold Cup winners, so they're the champions of the CONCACAF. They beat the USA in the final. That was 2-1. And yeah, historically, Mexico are the strongest team in the CONCACAF. They've been that for pretty much ever. So not too much of a surprise there, but have never really made that impact, as I mentioned, at the World Cup. Again, quarterfinals has been their best. So, definitely a lot of pressure, I think, is on the CONCACAF nations, and especially the hosts this time. Because of the added round of 32, I think if Mexico could at least match their record of previous World Cups, it won't be a bad performance for them or a bad showing. And if they could go beyond that, of course, that will be special for not just Mexico themselves, but for the region, for the CONCACAF, because I believe they've been overpassed by both the AFC and the CAF over the years. And of course, the CONMEBOL and the UEFA are going to be above them. So definitely need a big showing from the CONCACAF nations this time, especially again since it is hosted in that region. Okay, South Africa, how they qualified? They were in a tough group with Nigeria and Benin. Nigeria obviously would have been favourites to qualify from that group, but South Africa just about beat them, or just about finished top by a point. The group went to the final day. South Africa won their last match. They defeated Rwanda by 3-0. And that's how they was able to qualify for the 2026 World Cup. Again, it's the first time they're back since hosting back in 2010. Should add another thing, back in the AFCON last year, they did make it out of the group stage. This is something they haven't been able to do in the previous 3 World Cups that they've competed at. So if they could try and make it out of this group, this would be an achievement and it would be a good World Cup for them. Should mention this, because of the new added round of 32, 3 nations can possibly qualify from a group now. So the team that finishes third in this group may still have a chance, which I can see South Africa finishing in, to be honest, at least at best. Okay, and the next nation, South Korea, they were brilliant during their World Cup qualifying campaign, especially in the round 2. They won all their matches and only conceded 1 goal. The third round for them, a little more trickier. Surprisingly dropped points to Palestine twice and drawing games with both Oman and Jordan. But overall, South Korea was able to top their group and remained undefeated. The only nation in the AFC to go undefeated. So yeah, they're going into this World Cup looking extremely strong. And for me, the favourites to top this group. Alright, so let's check if there's any history with any of the teams in this group at prior World Cups. Again, I did mention earlier that both Mexico and South Africa did compete in the opening game of the 2010 World Cup, and they will now be competing in the opening game for the 2026 World Cup. So that's 2 times, this was going to be 2 times those 2 nations have competed against each other. Mexico and South Korea have a little bit of history. In 1998, it's the first time those 2 nations went up against each other. Mexico beat South Korea 3-1 on that. Years later, 2018, Mexico would again defeat South Korea, this time 2-1. Interesting enough, the French won both of those World Cups, France winning in 98 as the hosts. So yeah, this is the 3rd time they're meeting. I'll probably say a draw in that game though. I'll probably say a draw. and South Africa and South Korea. This will be the first time those two nations will compete against each other at the World Cup. I checked if they've ever had any friendlies, and no, this will be the first meeting between the two nations. Okay, so that's South Africa, South Korea, and Mexico. All three nations, as mentioned, have all hosted the World Cup in the past. And I should also mention this then, which I only just noticed or just realized. Mexico are the first nation from the CONCACAF from North America to ever host the World Cup, doing it back in 1970. And the first to ever host 2 World Cups, and now 3. South Korea, as co-hosts with Japan, became one of the first nations from the AFC, from Asia, to ever host the World Cup. And South Africa, back in 2010, became the very first nation from Africa to ever host the World Cup. So that's pretty cool. All 3 of those nations now in the same group. And they would be joined by one other nation from Europe. So all groups will have at least one nation from Europe, from the UEFA zone. Currently, we do not know what nation from Europe will be competing in this group, because that nation still needs to compete through the playoffs from the UEFA zone playoffs. UEFA Path D is where we will find out what nation from UEFA will compete against South Africa, South Korea, and the co-hosts, Mexico. The 4 nations in Path D: Czech Republic, Ireland, Denmark, and North Macedonia. Czech Republic and Ireland will go up against each other, and Denmark will take on North Macedonia. The nations that will win those games will then compete against each other in a final, and again, whoever wins that will be the nation to compete in Group A, or join Group A. Czech Republic, as an independent nation, so no longer joined with Slovakia, have only ever competed at the World Cup one occasion. As Czechoslovakia, they have reached 2 World Cup finals, competing in the very first All-European final back in 1934 against Italy, where they were defeated, and then they competed in the final in Chile in 1962 against Brazil, where once again, unfortunately for them, they were defeated. Ireland competed at the World Cup for the very first time in 1990, but haven't been at the World Cup since 2002. Denmark are probably the most consistent team out of the 4 that I've mentioned when it comes to qualifying for World Cups. They competed at the World Cup for the first time in '86, and since 1998 they've only missed out on 2 World Cups. And finally, North Macedonia, they're trying to qualify for their very first World Cup as an independent nation. I think most likely Denmark will end up qualifying. Definitely have a bit more of an easier match. No disrespect to North Macedonia, but I do feel they do have an easier game instead of going up against Czech Republic or Ireland straight away. I think we're looking at a Czechia final, but I will give it the edge to Denmark. And they got pretty unlucky. They got defeated by Scotland right at the end. Well, it is. Really good match that was, actually, between Denmark and Scotland. So yeah, I do think Denmark will qualify. All right, that was Group A. Mexico co-hosts, South Africa, South Korea, and finally that final spot is between Czechia, the Republic of Ireland, Denmark, and North Macedonia. We will see who gets that final spot at the end of this month to complete Group A. Okay, that was Group A. Thanks for watching. listening. Hope you enjoyed it. And tomorrow we'll be moving on to Group B, where we have another co-host, Canada. We'll be hosting for the first time ever. We have a host of the 2022 World Cup, Qatar, in that group, as well as the 1954 hosts, Switzerland, and another nation from Europe who hasn't qualified yet would also join that group. Thanks for watching, listening, appreciate it as usual. Please like, comment and subscribe. Would appreciate that as well. And stay safe and bye.